Detective Maya Johnson walked into the courtroom with the quiet confidence that had come from years of experience in law enforcement. Her posture was straight and her eyes focused ahead. She wasn't intimidated by the cold and sterile atmosphere of the room she had stood in many courtrooms before, but today was different. Today, she wasn't here on official business. She wasn't here as a witness or an officer of the law. She was just a citizen facing a minor situation that had somehow ended up in front of the judge. Maya looked around at the sea of people packed into the courtroom. Most of them looked anxious or defeated, but she felt no such feeling. She had done nothing wrong, but was forced into this place because of an oversight in her paperwork, a small mistake in a routine task, and here she was being treated like any other defendant. The judge presiding over the case was Judge Harold Thompson, a man known for his no-nonsense attitude and quick rulings. He had seen his share of petty offenses and had no patience for delays. He glanced at his docket and sighed heavily before calling the next case with an air of tired authority. Maya's name echoed through the room, and she walked forward with her head held high. The judge barely looked up as he called her up, his eyes scanning the file before him, as if the case was nothing more than an inconvenience to him. He barely spared her a glance, and barely seemed to register anything about her beyond the words on the paper. Maya stood at the front of the courtroom, hands clasped in front of her, trying to remain calm. She could feel the weight of the judge's dismissive attitude, and knew he saw her as just another name on a list, another person wasting his precious time. She gave a brief explanation of the situation, but Judge Thompson interrupted her with an impatient wave of his hand, as if he didn't want to hear it. He only seemed interested in the fine and the punishment she would receive. He raised his hand, and in a voice that barely carried any emotion, he pronounced his judgment, a fine, a relatively large one. Given the circumstances, he did not look at Maya when he spoke, nor did he give any indication that he saw anything more than just another face in a long line of cases. He muttered something about responsibility and how the court had to enforce the law before turning his attention to the next case, as if he had already forgotten her name. Maya stood there for a moment, taken aback by how quickly he dismissed her. Her pulse quickened and frustration bubbled up inside her, but she controlled herself. She knew this wasn't the time or place to make a scene. She had seen too many people fall into the trap of reacting emotionally in these kinds of situations. It would do her no good to challenge the judge's decision. Not in this setting, not in front of everyone. Maya turned and walked away with quiet determination, every step heavy but purposeful. She had grown used to people underestimating her. She had spent years fighting against the limitations others tried to place on her, and this moment would be no different. As she stepped outside into the bright sunlight, the weight of the moment still lingered, but she had more important things to focus on. She wasn't going to let a courtroom full of strangers define who she was or where she was headed. Her work wasn't done, and the city needed her more than ever. Maya reached for her phone, knowing there was a message waiting for her that would change everything. Maya pulled out her phone as soon as she stepped outside the courthouse, her fingers quickly unlocking it and scanning the screen. The message from Captain Andrew Hayes was short, but it struck her like a bolt of lightning. Asterisk Maya, the mayor's office has chosen you to lead the new task force. It's time. Asterisk, she read it twice, making sure she wasn't misinterpreting anything. Her heart skipped a beat, and the lingering frustration from the courtroom seemed to evaporate instantly. This was it. The opportunity she had been working toward for years had just arrived, and it was bigger than anything she had imagined. For a moment, she stood frozen, her hand gripping the phone tightly, unsure if she should laugh or scream. She had been waiting for the right moment, the right chance to prove herself, but nothing had prepared her for this. A task force, one she would lead. The weight of it sunk in as her mind began to race. She was about to take charge of a high-profile initiative aimed at dismantling one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the city. It wasn't just a promotion, it was a recognition of everything she had accomplished so far and everything she was capable of. Her phone buzzed again. It was Captain Hayes. Asterisk, we need to meet. Bring your A game. You're the one they trust to lead this operation. Asterisk. Maya didn't need any more convincing. She walked briskly down the street, heading toward her car. The city around her felt different now, its noise and chaos no longer frustrating but somehow comforting. She was no longer just another detective. She was about to be the leader of a specialized unit, one that would need every ounce of her skill and determination. As she drove to the meeting spot, she thought about her past. She had spent years earning the respect of her colleagues, not with words but through action. Her quick thinking and relentless pursuit of justice had gotten her noticed in a way that had nothing to do with her age or gender or the color of her skin. Maya had worked harder than anyone to prove that she belonged in a position of authority. Yet, despite all her success, she still encountered obstacles, like the judge in the courtroom earlier that day, who had seen her as nothing more than a regular citizen, a face in the crowd. But today it was different. She was about to prove that there was nothing regular about her. This task force, the one that would be hunting down the criminal syndicate tearing apart the city, was now in her hands. Maya was no longer playing on the sidelines. She was in charge. Captain Hayes was waiting for her when she arrived at the discreet office location. He was a grizzled veteran, someone who had seen it all, and yet there was a certain respect in his eyes as he greeted her. The moment he saw her, he knew the choice was right. Maya had the mindset, the tactical brilliance, and the leadership skills to take on this challenge. "Maya," he said with a nod, "I'm glad you're here. This is bigger than anything we've dealt with before. The people we're up against are dangerous, well-organized, but I've seen what you can do. You're exactly what we need." She nodded, her eyes already focused on the plans and blueprints spread out on the table in front of them. She knew that this mission would be the ultimate test, one that could either make or break her career. But there was no doubt in her mind that she was ready. With a deep breath, she leaned forward, her gaze sharp and determined. "Let's get to work," she said, the weight of responsibility settling over her. She wasn't just leading a task force now. She was leading a movement. Judge Harold Thompson sat back in his chair, the courtroom's usual bustle now reduced to a distant murmur. He rubbed his temples, the fatigue from a long day of hearings weighing on him. His mind kept drifting back to the young woman he had encountered earlier that morning, Detective Maya Johnson. She had left an impression, though not for the reasons he expected. Initially, he had dismissed her, just another minor case, another routine fine. But the more he thought about her, the more a nagging curiosity started to take root. The fine he had imposed was hardly significant, a small sum compared to the more pressing matters that filled his docket. Yet the dismissal he had shown her lingered in his mind. Why had she been so calm? Her demeanor had been composed, certainly, but there had been something else about her. A quiet confidence that wasn't typical for someone standing before him for a minor issue. For a fleeting moment, he had felt as though he had misjudged her, but it was only a moment, fleeting and quickly dismissed as he moved on to the next case. However, as the days passed, more and more stories about the city's newest crime-fighting hero started making headlines. There were whispers in the halls of the courthouse, at the local diner, and even from his colleagues. Detective Maya Johnson was making waves in the city's criminal justice system, but not as just another officer. She had become the head of an elite task force that had recently taken down a sprawling drug ring and arrested several high-profile members of the city's underworld. Judge Thompson, though initially indifferent, began hearing more details about her work. A notorious criminal, Victor Morales, the head of one of the most dangerous syndicates in the area, had been caught in a multi-layered sting operation spearheaded by none other than Maya herself. The operation had been executed flawlessly, and Morales was now facing trial. The news buzzed with admiration for the young detective who had led the charge, earning praise from the mayor's office, law enforcement, and even the public. Her actions had made the streets safer and had dealt a blow to one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the city. As he read through the reports and heard more about her, the guilt began to gnaw at him. This was the same woman he had casually dismissed in court not long ago. The woman who had walked out of his courtroom without protest or complaint, her eyes steady, her head held high. He now realized he had been blind to her potential and underestimated her completely. He began to dig deeper into her background, a process that felt uncomfortable. Judge Thompson wasn't the type to pry into the lives of people who appeared before him, but something about Maya's story compelled him. The more he learned, the more her accomplishments impressed him. She wasn't just another detective. She had risen to the top of her field, earning a reputation for her meticulous work, sharp mind, and dedication. People trusted her. They believed in her. Judge Thompson found himself faced with a troubling realization. How many others like Maya had he dismissed over the years? How many had been underestimated simply because of the way they looked or the way they spoke? He couldn't deny that Maya's composure, her calm demeanor, her very presence in his courtroom earlier that week had all triggered his biases without him even realizing it. Now the weight of that realization was starting to sink in. He turned to the next case on his docket but found himself unable to focus. His thoughts were consumed with Maya and with the deeper implications of how a quick judgment could sometimes be a dangerous thing. Maya sat at the head of a long conference table, the glow of multiple monitors illuminating her focused face. Her team was spread out around her, each member focused on their own screens and tasks, but they all knew this mission would not succeed unless they worked together. The stakes were high, higher than they'd been in a long time, and Maya had no intention of letting the criminals slip through their fingers now. This operation wasn't just another bust. It was a statement, a testament to what they were capable of when they worked with precision and foresight. They were targeting the Grayson cartel, one of the most elusive and dangerous criminal syndicates in the city. The group had a hand in everything: drugs, human trafficking, money laundering. It wasn't just about taking down criminals. It was about dismantling an entire network that had been destroying lives for years. Maya's task force had been quietly collecting intelligence for months, piecing together fragmented reports, surveillance footage, and tips from confidential sources. Every step had been calculated, every move planned with meticulous care, and today was the day they would strike. Maya's sharp eyes scanned the digital layout of their operation on the screen in front of her, studying the target areas. She'd been in high-pressure situations before, but this one felt different. Every decision had to be perfect. A single misstep could lead to disaster. The Grayson cartel was known for its ruthlessness, and their reach stretched far beyond the city limits. They had resources, influence, and money. They would not go down quietly. But Maya had never been afraid of a challenge. "Okay," Maya said, her voice calm yet commanding. "We're going in fast and hard. We've got intel on 2 major locations, Grayson's private warehouse and a safe house on the edge of town. Both are high risk, but we've got the element of surprise. Keep your communications tight, stay alert, and no mistakes. Let's end this." Her team nodded, their faces set with determination. They trusted her leadership implicitly, and Maya had earned every ounce of that trust. She wasn't just their superior. She was their equal, their guide, and their strength. No one questioned her decisions. Not now, not after everything she had led them through. The first location, the warehouse, was where they believed Grayson and his top lieutenants would be storing weapons and drug shipments. The second was a private residence where they suspected Grayson himself was hiding. Maya had planned the 2 raids in tandem to maximize their chances of success. If they hit both locations at once, they could overwhelm the cartel's resources, cutting them off from any possible escape routes. As her team prepared to move out, Maya received an encrypted message on her phone. She glanced at it quickly. "Captain Hayes. Asterisk, be careful. These people don't play by the rules. Stay sharp, asterisk." Maya felt a surge of confidence in her gut. She had faced danger before, but this was different. She wasn't just going in as a cop. She was leading this operation, holding the reins. The weight of responsibility settled over her like armor, protecting her from the fear that might otherwise have crept in. She had spent years working her way up through the ranks, never hesitating, never taking her eye off the bigger picture. She wasn't about to stop now. The countdown began. Maya's team moved into position, their footsteps silent in the dark of the night. Their vehicles were parked in strategic locations, hidden from view but close enough to ensure a quick getaway if needed. Maya took a deep breath, her mind running through the mission one last time. It was all in place. They were ready. "On my mark," she whispered into the comms, her voice steady but commanding. 3, 2, 1. The operation exploded into motion. Gunfire echoed in the distance, muffled by the buildings around them. The team moved with precision, sweeping through the warehouse with military-like efficiency. Maya led the charge, her instincts sharp as she directed her team with surgical precision. They hit their targets, taking down cartel members and securing evidence faster than anyone could have predicted. Within minutes, the warehouse was in their hands. But that was just the beginning. Maya knew they had to move fast. They couldn't afford to lose any ground now. Grayson's men would be expecting retaliation. The task force had to keep the momentum going. And as Maya surveyed the chaos unfolding in the warehouse, she couldn't help but feel a rush of adrenaline. This was her moment. This was what she was born to do. Judge Harold Thompson sat in his office, papers scattered across his desk, but his mind was elsewhere. The usual rhythm of his day had been disrupted by the news he couldn't shake. The stories surrounding Detective Maya Johnson. He'd been hearing her name more and more in recent weeks, but it wasn't just in passing. It was in every conversation. Her operation, her success, her ability to dismantle the Grayson cartel with a precision and efficiency that many seasoned officers could only dream of. There was something about her that intrigued him, something that gnawed at him in a way he wasn't used to. The day after Maya's daring raid on the cartel warehouse, news reports flooded in. The operation had been a resounding success. Officers had arrested multiple cartel members, seized a massive stockpile of drugs and firearms, and most impressively, had intercepted a high-level deal that could have destabilized the entire city. The story of how Maya had led the charge, coordinating multiple teams in a synchronized attack, was splashed across newspapers and online news outlets. She wasn't just a rising star in law enforcement, she was quickly becoming the face of hope for the city's future. For a moment, Judge Thompson felt a bitter sting of regret. He hadn't even recognized her when she stood in his courtroom just days ago. He hadn't paid her the respect she deserved, hadn't even bothered to consider that the woman standing before him was capable of orchestrating a complex operation of this magnitude. To him, she was just another name on a docket, just another case in a long day of hearings. Now, after hearing about her achievements, the full weight of his oversight settled heavily on him. The realization hit him hard. He had made a mistake, and not just with Maya. Over the years, how many others had he dismissed with the same casual, dismissive attitude? How many others had walked into his courtroom only to be overlooked because of their gender, race, or even their demeanor? He pushed the thought aside. This wasn't about him. This was about Maya. He had been wrong, and he knew it. Maya had proven herself not just as an officer of the law, but as a force in her own right. She had accomplished what many in the system deemed impossible. She had taken down an entire criminal empire, one that had evaded capture for years. And what had he done? He had slapped her with a fine and sent her on her way, oblivious to the fact that she was already working to change the course of justice in the city. The more Judge Thompson learned about Maya, the more he admired her. Her ability to navigate the complexities of law enforcement, her determination to protect the city despite the odds stacked against her, it was nothing short of remarkable. And yet, despite her success, she had continued to fight an uphill battle against the biases of the system. He could see it now in a way he hadn't before. Maya wasn't just fighting criminals. She was fighting the very system that was supposed to support her. That night, Judge Thompson couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the images of Maya's calm demeanor in his courtroom. He couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if he had taken the time to truly understand who she was. What would he have seen if he had looked closer, listened more carefully, given her the respect she deserved from the start? In the morning, he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to do something. It wasn't just about apologizing. It was about changing how he viewed the people who came before him. Maya wasn't just a symbol of justice. She was a reminder that he, too, had to change. But that meant confronting his own biases, and that wasn't going to be easy. Still, one thing was clear. He had to reach out to Maya, to acknowledge his mistake, and perhaps to learn from her. The realization that Maya Johnson was no ordinary detective had become a truth he couldn't ignore anymore. Maya's team moved swiftly through the streets, their operations now in full swing. The success of the warehouse raid was only the beginning. As she reviewed the data pouring in from the field, Maya couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility growing heavier by the minute. The Grayson cartel wasn't just a group of criminals. It was a highly organized network that stretched into every corner of the city. The task force had dealt a major blow, but Maya knew they hadn't won yet. There was still work to be done, still pieces of the puzzle left to uncover. In the quiet moments between operations, Maya allowed herself a few seconds of reflection. The victory was sweet, yes, but her thoughts always drifted to the larger picture, the lives her team was changing. The innocent people whose families were being torn apart by the cartel's illegal activities. She wasn't just fighting for a win, she was fighting for justice, for the future of the city. Every decision she made, every move she orchestrated had to be perfect. That afternoon, as she prepared to brief her team for the next round of raids, Maya's phone buzzed with an unexpected message. She had been so focused on the task at hand that she hadn't realized how much time had passed since she had last heard from Judge Thompson. His name appeared at the top of the screen. Asterisk, we need to talk, asterisk. Her first instinct was to ignore it. The last time she had seen him, he had handed down a fine that felt dismissive of everything she was working to achieve. He had been another obstacle she didn't need to deal with. But curiosity won over. She clicked the message, opening it fully. Asterisk, he made a mistake with you. I've been following your progress, and I need to apologize. When you have a moment, could we meet? Asterisk. Maya stared at the screen, her mind whirring. The judge, apologizing. It wasn't something she had expected. Her experience in law enforcement had taught her to never expect anything from the system, especially not empathy or acknowledgement. But here it was, and she couldn't deny that part of her felt conflicted. She had always carried herself with a quiet pride, not seeking validation from anyone, let alone from someone in a position of authority who had once disregarded her. But there was something genuine in his words, something that made her pause. She took a deep breath, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She knew better than to rush into anything. The system had its flaws, and Judge Thompson was a part of it. But she had learned that sometimes change came from the most unexpected places. She typed back, asterisking listening. Where and when, asterisk? He replied almost immediately. Asterisk, tomorrow at noon. I'll meet you at the courthouse. Thank you for giving me a chance, asterisk. The following day, Maya walked into the courthouse with a sense of purpose, her thoughts focused but measured. She had no idea what Judge Thompson wanted to discuss, but she was ready to hear him out. As she entered his office, she found him standing by the window, looking out at the city skyline. The man who had once dismissed her now seemed different, more human, less like the impersonal figure she had first encountered. Detective Johnson, he greeted her, his voice softer than she had expected. Please have a seat. Maya nodded and sat across from him, waiting for him to speak. The silence stretched for a moment before he broke it. I owe you an apology, he began, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. I misjudged you. I didn't see the full picture when you were in my courtroom, and for that I'm sorry. Maya met his gaze, her expression neutral but her mind racing. Apologies were rare, especially from someone in his position. She had expected confrontation or indifference, not this acknowledgement of his mistake. I've been following your work, he continued, and I see now that I was wrong to treat you the way I did. You're not just another officer in the system. You're someone who is changing the game, and I want to make sure I do my part in supporting that change. Maya sat back in her chair, processing his words. It wasn't the apology she had imagined, but it was real. More importantly, it was a recognition that the system, her work, her leadership, was something worth respecting. The task force, the battles, the quiet moments of doubt, it had all led her here, to this conversation, to this new path. The following weeks were a blur of activity for Maya. The momentum of the operation had not slowed, and she found herself buried in briefing after briefing, strategy sessions, and endless coordination with various agencies. The task force had made significant progress dismantling the Grayson cartel, but there were still pieces of the puzzle to be put together. Maya had to remain sharp, focused. There was no room for complacency. She often found herself thinking back to the conversation she had with Judge Thompson. The apology, while unexpected, had left an impression on her. It was a step towards something she had always known, but could never articulate. The system had to change. It wasn't just about catching criminals or making arrests. It was about altering the way people saw each other, especially those in positions of power. People like Judge Thompson had a responsibility to understand the struggles of those who worked within the system, the people who fought for justice on the ground. And the fact that he recognized his failure in that moment meant something. It meant that even the highest levels of authority could still learn, still adapt. But Maya wasn't one to rest on a victory, no matter how small. The world she operated in was ever-changing, and she knew that no amount of progress in the courtroom or in the streets would be enough if she didn't stay 2 steps ahead. Grayson's syndicate wasn't done yet. They still had resources scattered across the city, and it was only a matter of time before they regrouped and retaliated. She could feel it in the air. A storm was coming. It wasn't until she received a call from Captain Hayes late one evening that the magnitude of the threat revealed itself. A large shipment of drugs had gone missing, and intelligence suggested it was being rerouted to a new location in the city. This wasn't just a small slip-up. This was deliberate, a strategic move by someone within their ranks, or possibly someone outside of it. Maya's pulse quickened as she listened to Hayes outline the situation. "I don't like the sound of this, Maya. Someone's playing both sides here," Hayes said, his voice tight with frustration. "We need to move quickly before this gets out of hand." Maya ran a hand through her hair, her mind already racing through potential scenarios. She had learned to trust her instincts, and they were telling her that there was something bigger at play. The Grayson cartel wasn't just a criminal operation. It was a network, and networks had fingers in every pie. The more she uncovered, the more she realized just how far-reaching its influence was. Her task force wasn't just up against a gang. They were challenging a structure embedded within the very fabric of the city. As she organized a team to investigate the missing shipment, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something far more complicated than she had anticipated. This wasn't just about breaking up a drug deal. It was about unearthing the corrupt systems that allowed this kind of operation to exist. Maya wasn't just fighting for her city. She was fighting for the future of law enforcement itself. The lines between good and evil, right and wrong, had started to blur in ways she hadn't prepared for. When Maya arrived at the location where the shipment was supposed to have been delivered, she felt a shiver run down her spine. The place was eerily quiet, too quiet. She motioned for her team to stay close, her every sense on alert. They had anticipated a confrontation, but this was different. As she stepped into the warehouse, the realization hit her all at once. There were no criminals here, no cartel members to arrest. Just an abandoned space, filled with traces of something larger, something more insidious. The unease she had felt earlier deepened. This wasn't just a missing shipment. It was a warning. Someone in the system was working against her. The task force wasn't just fighting the cartel anymore. They were fighting a deeper, more entrenched corruption within their own ranks. As she left the warehouse, Maya's thoughts were filled with questions. Who could she trust? How far did this conspiracy go? The battle was just beginning, and the forces at play were more dangerous than she had imagined. Maya had no choice but to keep moving forward, determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Maya stood alone in the parking lot, her mind swirling with the weight of everything that had transpired. The missing shipment had been the tipping point. The evidence had been clear. Someone within the system had tipped off the Grayson cartel. The fear that had gnawed at her for weeks now had a name: betrayal. She had thought that dismantling the cartel was the hardest part of her job, but she was now realizing the true battle wasn't just against criminals on the streets. It was against those who wore the same badge, those who operated in the shadows of law enforcement. She had spent the entire night going over the evidence, piecing together the timeline of the stolen shipment. The betrayal was deep, far more than a rogue cop or a few bad apples. The corruption went beyond what she had imagined. People in power, powerful enough to move the cartel's operations without fear of retaliation. These were the forces she was up against now, the hidden hands that worked behind the curtains of the justice system. The task force had made incredible progress, but Maya now realized that her next move would require more than just tactical precision. It would require strategy, deception, and careful alliances. She couldn't trust anyone who was too close to the operation. The web of corruption was more expansive than she could have predicted, and it threatened not only her team's success, but also the very integrity of the mission. Her first call was to Captain Hayes. "Maya, are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "I don't know," she replied. "We've been set up. Someone on the inside is playing both sides, and I think they're one step ahead of us. They're using our own resources against us." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What are you thinking?" "I need to go after them quietly," she said. "We can't make any more noise than we already have. If we move too quickly, we risk tipping off whoever's behind this." "We'll follow your lead," Hayes said, his voice firm. "We trust you, Maya. Just be careful." Her plan started to take shape. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but she had no choice. The betrayal within the ranks had to be exposed, and she was the one who had to do it. Maya spent the next several days working behind the scenes, meeting with trusted allies in the department, slowly and cautiously building a network of support. She knew that the corrupted officials wouldn't hesitate to take down anyone who stood in their way, and the only way to win this battle was to stay several moves ahead. Her every step was calculated, her every action purposeful. She had to take down the corrupted elements without exposing the task force to further danger. This was no longer just about taking down criminals. It was about saving the integrity of everything she had worked for. One afternoon, as she was reviewing her notes, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to find Judge Harold Thompson standing in her doorway. "Maya, I need to speak with you," he said, his face serious, but his voice holding a trace of something unspoken. Maya hesitated, her mind running through all the possible scenarios. The last time they had spoken, it had been an apology. But now, something about his presence made her uneasy. Still, she gestured for him to sit. "Is this about what's been going on?" Maya asked, keeping her tone neutral. Judge Thompson nodded. "I've been doing some digging of my own. After our conversation, I started looking into some of the players involved, and I found something disturbing." Maya's heart skipped a beat. Could he know more than she did? Was he trying to protect her, or was this another layer of the conspiracy? He leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's someone on the inside of the task force. Someone with ties to Grayson's people. I think I know who it is, and I want to help you bring them down." Maya's pulse quickened, the weight of his words settling into her chest. She had never expected help from the courts, especially not from someone like Thompson. But here he was, offering his support. She realized then that this was her chance to turn the tide. The walls around her had started to crumble, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't fighting alone. Together, they began to plan. The final battle had just begun, and Maya was ready. She wasn't just going to take down a cartel. She was going to uproot an entire system of corruption, no matter who stood in her way.